You're listening to a Fresh Paths podcast from Newlife Erdington. The Fresh Paths podcast is a fantastic guide for your journey of faith. Each week we offer you a sermon, testimony, or a bite-sized Bible lesson that is perfect for busy people on the go. The Fresh Paths podcast makes it easy for you to get your regular dose of inspiration and wisdom. So with that being said, let's get to it.
This time we're going to have the message, and there isn't an invited guest speaker, and it's not me. What we're going to be having is a pre-recorded message. 15 years ago, I was involved in a Windrush event, organizing it for Development and Missions Network and Christian Aid. So it was the 60th anniversary of Windrush, and we organized an event held at the Town Hall in Birmingham, Sunday the 22nd of June 2008, 6 p.m. Windrush event took place. And at that time, there wasn't many people, not as many people didn't know that much about Windrush. They had had a 50th anniversary, BBC produced some documentaries, etc. But the average Caribbean person, you say Windrush, you'll be hit and miss whether or not they would have heard of it. And certainly the population in general, most of them wouldn't know what you're on about if you said Windrush. So that's the context of the time. Obviously, that has completely changed now. So this message, though, is an excellent message by Dr R David Muir from London. 15 years ago, in front of 500 people at Town Hall in Birmingham. I think it's an excellent message, and it's relevant today as it was back then. Obviously, there'll be some references to what happened on the night, so, you know, those things won't be relevant to us today. And of course, Windrush scandal has not happened. This is 10 years before the Windrush scandal. So that's just the context. But besides that, the message to me is as relevant today. And for me, looking back, I think and for all of us, I think, it'd be good to think these words are being said 15 years ago, right in this city, in the center of the city. How are we doing right now? It's a good time to reflect on that. So
we're really privileged now to have our guest speaker for the evening, Dr. David Muir. Just a little bit about him before he comes to the stage. Dr. David Muir is a political scientist and a theologian. He began his career as a secondary school teacher in South London, where he taught history and religion before going on to the Commonwealth Institute in 1988 as head of teaching, research and regional development. During that time, he served as a part-time principal of a community school. David has recently been appointed as Public Policy Director of the Evangelical Alliance and is responsible for public theology and public affairs. David is a politics and government graduate. He has an MA in political education and public policy from London University and a PhD in theology, Black theology and Pentecostalism. That's from King's College, London. David taught history and politics at London University, communication and education at the University of East London. He's been around a few universities, right? And Caribbean and Black British political history at London Metropolitan University, where he is currently a visiting fellow. David was a member of the government's policy action team. He also served the Home Office's Lawrence Steering Group as chairman of the Police, Race and Diversity Development Board. He worked with Sir Bernard Crick on advising the Home Secretary on citizenship, nationality and integration, and served as deputy chairman of the Metropolitan Police Authority until 2004. Before joining the EA, David was a member of the leadership team at Mile End New Testament Church of God. David is married to Pauline, the important bit, and members of the family are active in the local church ministry. How can a man have done so much in such a short time? Let's just welcome Dr. David Muir to the stage.
I just want to say a word of thanks to a few people. First of all, I want to thank the organisers for asking me to be here this evening. In that regard, I do want to thank Dion Gravesandi. She mentioned this to me, it seems like a long time ago, that I should do this. She's down there. My PA put it in the diary, and these things just come upon you like the Holy Spirit does. So, I'm here. And I want to thank David also. David phoned me yesterday, and he was slightly worried that I was going to be driving and bringing my family all the way from sunny London, and I might need some refreshments. Now, you know what it's like. If you come from the Caribbean, there are certain weddings, you know, when you go to them, you must eat your food before you go. Yeah? So, because I've got a Caribbean wife, she decided before we set out, we must have our Sunday dinner. So Dave, thank you very much, but we did eat our Sunday dinner, and we may get something after. So thank you for your kind concern. I also want to thank Pauline. Pauline, my wife, is here. If she can stand up, please. I know she's embarrassed, but that's okay. And my daughter, in front of her, Shani, is 14. Shani, you know these teenagers, you know, they get a bit shy. Shani was very, very keen to come with me. And then I was concerned that we were going to get back to London very, very late. And because I wanted to bring Shani, when you've got 5 daughters, if you have got 5 daughters, I have, you know the problems. Then Rashida wanted to come, so I brought Rashida, and she's here, and she's going to do a bit of reading with me and us later on. So thank you, family, for coming with me, because driving over, 180 miles from London can be very, very lonely, even with a good CD in your car. So thanks for all of that. And I mean, I almost feel as if, you know, you've had the sermon, you've had the stuff in the drama, which was absolutely fantastic. You've also had the social commentary in the poetry by Beverly, which was riveting. You know, you got a history lesson in about 7 minutes that takes most of my students 12 weeks to get through. So I want to thank all of you for coming, and thank those who have done all that they've done before. It's always a bit strange when you do these kind of things, because, you know, you prepare some stuff, but you always got to gauge the audience. And if there are kids in the audience, there are older people, younger people, and this is not a lecture. But because I'm a Pentecostal, allow me to talk, to have a conversation. And I hope I won't get in the spirit while I'm doing so. I want to make a disclaimer before I start, and that is that I didn't get off the Windrush in 1948. I was born 10 years later, and I came to England 17 years after those good folks actually docked at Tilbury. But I know a man who was on that boat, and I want to say something about him later. Now, what time have I got to finish? Because as a good Pentecostal, I want to keep time. I've got about 103 points, but I only want to make about 7, so it shouldn't take us too long. And I was told I had about 30 minutes. So I'm going to try to do no less than that. I sometimes feel like, the old 85-year-old man who found himself before the judge. And the judge says to him, "You've been very, very naughty, old chap. I'm going to give you 15 years. And the 85-year-old man says to the judge, "I'll never make it." And the judge says, "Do the best you can." So I'm going to try to do the best I can this evening, because I feel that I'm in church, even though I know I'm in the town hall. But the Holy Spirit is here, and God be praised. I'm really sad tonight that my father and my mother aren't here with me. Because as the poetry was being read, what came to my mind was the grip. The grip. And my father had a big grip. I used to get into that grip when I was a youngster. And as Beverly was reading, I could see this grip on top of the wardrobe. And our people didn't put some little sticker on it. They painted their name so that regardless of what happened, it wouldn't come off. But I remember a time when the grip just disappeared. And I wasn't too sure why. But as Beverly was reading, Beverly, you took me back to the Caribbean. Where is she anyhow? Thank you very much. You took me back to the Caribbean, and it was beautiful. And I know sometimes we can define ourselves by the worst that's happened to us. Of course we can. I'm a historian. The great Hegel said that history is about blood and sweat. He said that history is like a slaughterhouse. But when I think about how we've got over, and I think about my parents, my grandparents, and you think about yours, you know that we couldn't have done it without the grace of God. And I'm not ashamed to say that, because that's what my grandmother. And Beverly, as you were reading, I was thinking about, they say, give me the boy or girl until 7, and I'll show you the man. I left the Caribbean at the age of 7. Many of us were left by our parents, and it was the grandparents or the auntie that took care of us. And I can stand before you today as a born-again Christian because of a lovely grandmother called Ivy Ajide, who took me to church every Sunday. And before I went to church, I had fresh bread and beef stew. Fresh bread and beef stew on the veranda in the Caribbean in sunny Guyana. But I also got 3 things before I came to England. And the first thing was that my grandmother gave me a sense of love. And I tell my girls, and I've now become a grandfather, I've got my first granddaughter, and I think to myself that if I can have the relationship with my granddaughter that my grandmother had with me, we would have been blessed 1,000 times. But my grandmother in the Caribbean, and some of you can relate to this, taught me about love, that she loved me. And I am the confident, strident Christian I am today because my grandmother loved me rotten. Some of you grandmother will say that, maybe you spoil your kids. If there is such a thing, yes, my grandmother spoilt me. But you know what she told me? That I was special and I could do anything I want. So when I came to England, I believed that, in spite of how bad things were. The second thing, my grandmother gave me a great love of God. You can't escape God if you come from the Caribbean. And of course, when you're 5 years of age, and someone tells you that, the world's going to come to an end tomorrow, when you're 5, you say, God, I want to live. I want to see the next day. And you pray, and you pray. And the next morning comes, and you think, my goodness, I must be important. That even God decided not to let the world come to an end because of me. You believe those things when you're 5 years of age in the Caribbean. And I want to say for young people here, I will never forget that I fell in love at the age of 6. Did you hear that? Mothers, fathers, at the age of 6, with a young girl called Desiree. And my friend and I in class decided that the one who came first in the exam will have Desiree for a girlfriend. And that morning I got up, I went to school, I thought I'd won, and I forgot to put a capital letter as I started a sentence, and I came second. And I lost Desiree. But of course, as young boys do, no one told Desiree about this thing. And I didn't get over Desiree until I met Pauline. So I want to say to you parents, if the kids come home and tell you 5 or 6, 7 they're in love, you better believe it. They sometimes say that, it's only puppy love, but I tell you, it's very, very real to the puppy. So I discovered love, I discovered family love in my grandmother, but most of all, I discovered God. And if nothing else I say, because I'm just having a chat, aren't I? I want you to know that I pay tribute to the older generation. When I saw George Macpherson talking about opportunities, talking about no Irish, no blacks, no dogs, that's real. The kind of thing that I wouldn't put up with, my generation didn't. They did it because they wanted a brighter future for their kids. So I say to my father, Dad, why did I leave my grandmother? And listen, folks, the imagination of a 5-year-old is wonderful, because I thought, even at 7, having got this wonderful suit in Georgetown, if you're Guyanese, in Fogarty's department store with my grandmother, a beautiful suit, I thought that if I threw myself into the trench on the morning I was coming to England, I wouldn't have to come. And you know what I did? I tell you what, that's exactly what I wanted to do. And lo and behold, as I was just about to jump, I was caught by an uncle who normally wouldn't catch anyone. But it happened, and I came here. So, Beverly, when you were talking, so many things came back, and I want to thank you for that. I do want to move on very, very quickly. One of the things that Caribbean people know and understand is something about struggles. If you haven't seen this book, and you've got about 45, 48 pounds to spare, you may want to treat someone to that black British companion. There are lots of stories in there, things about the Windrush. A wonderful book by Vivian Francis entitled With Hope in Their Eyes. We forget that when these folks came, and when I was at the university, I often wanted my students to actually get the passengers list, go through the names and to see them, and also to add up the average age. The average age of these folks was no more than about 24 years of age. Young pioneers, hope in their eyes. Obviously, the 60th anniversary is not as big as the 50th. It never is. But 10 years ago, there was a big thing, the BBC. This is a man who actually did come off that ship. Some of you might know the great Sam King. Stationed in Britain during the war, went back to the Caribbean, came back on the Windrush. He was in the RAF, later on became mayor of Southwark, and lived not too far from where I currently live. And one of the things that Sam King says, he talks a lot about the expectations of that generation. They were not lazy people. They were not fickle folks. They were young folks who wanted to make a difference for their family. And yes, we know about the 5-year stories. But I say to myself that how different things would have been if the Empire Windrush didn't make it to the shores of Tilbury. I want Rashida to come now and to read you something from Sam King's book. Rashida, darling, she's a bit shy. She told me she wants to be an actress, so I told her she's got a great opportunity now. So thank you, Rashida.
With us in such close proximity for 3 weeks, the ship became a hotbed of frayed nerves and loss of temper, but there were no fights. The operative command was no disturbance, peace and love whatever the matter. Behaviour remained impeccable. I was beginning to feel relieved and cool when an announcement supervened. One day at around 9 p.m, the Empire Windrush would be docking in a few hours' time. This sent the passengers wild with excitement and happiness, which went on all nights as we kept a watchful eye on the clock and an open ear for the next public call for attention. The hours ticked away, and it wasn't until towards daylight that we could feel the MV Empire Windrush diminishing her pace until she emerged from the dark and desolate waters and approached Tilbury Harbour on the Thames in a chilly prevailing wind on the 22nd of June 1948. We were never to hear of the MV Empire Windrush again until 1953, when it sank in the Mediterranean on its way from the Far East. 4 of the crew lost their lives fighting a fire in the engine room, but 1,200 troops were evacuated. One could see the portent pointing to the eventual loss of the empire.
Thank you very much, Rashida. Thank you. Well done, David. That's beautiful. Thank you. Less than 10 years after Tilbury, the great ship sank. I'd like you to activate your historical imagination and go with me for a moment. Imagine if in the Atlantic the ship had sank. Imagine what the news readers would have said. Imagine what the papers would have said. 492 West Indians died on their way to the mother country, trying to make a better life for themselves. I wonder if there would have been a day of national mourning. I wonder if the Queen would have sent a written condolence note to all the families. I wonder if the Governor General of Jamaica would have held in the Queen's place a minute's silence for those who perished in the Atlantic. I wonder what the BBC would have said. I wondered if the Prime Minister of this country, Clement Attlee, would have gone to Jamaica and there would have been a national day of mourning and a memorial for those young people. I wonder if things were different. If after the Windrush docked in 1948, let's say 2 years later, 500 other folks from the West Indian islands came. I wonder if the reception would have been wonderful. There would have been a vote of sympathy. Yes, 2 years before, hundreds perish, but they're still coming. I wonder how different things would have been if the Empire Windrush didn't make it to Tilbury in 1948. I wonder what the expectations would have been of those who were coming after, knowing fully well that the ship had sank. When I came to England in 1966, I came on BOAC. You might have done the same thing. My grandmother was very, very keen to ensure that she made me some homemade patties, so I had something cultural on the plane. But when they did arrive, on the very, very same day that they arrived, what I call 11 wise men from Westminster wrote a letter to the Prime Minister complaining that these folks were coming to this country and it would actually create a lot of aggro unhappiness. It would impair the harmony of the country. They also said that these folks were coming and they were totally unfit by virtue of their education, their culture, and their custom. Beverley reminded us that these folks probably knew more British history than your average man and woman on the Clapham omnibus. They knew about Stratford-upon-Avon. They knew about Shakespeare. They knew about the streets of London. And yet still, you may think, was this Enoch Powell? Was this the Conservative Party? But this was 11 Labour MPs on the very, very same day expressing very, very strong sentiments about many of these men who had fought for the empire only a few years before. How do you judge a nation's mood? Do you judge it primarily by its politician? Do you judge it by its press? Do you judge it by its churches? I've often tried to get it out of my father by asking him, Dad, weren't things really bad when you came here? Didn't you have a difficult time? Weren't you abused? Didn't you have racist name-calling? And my dad said, actually, no, I was okay. A lot of folks I met were very, very nice to me. But these were 11 Labour MPs saying that these folks from the Caribbean who were coming to the motherland had no right to actually be here. But I don't want to judge the mood of the nation primarily by its politicians, because we know that politicians often get it wrong. Another MP in Brixton, Marcus Lipton, tells you something slightly different, doesn't he? He made it absolutely clear, having heard what these 11 MPs said, that he wanted these Caribbean folks to feel welcome and also to see Britain as their second home. As if our folks didn't know, Tom Dryberg made it quite clear that Britain was no paradise. And of course, as they landed, one sergeant told the men on the ship that if they weren't prepared to work hard in Britain, they might as well jump overboard now and swim back to the Caribbean. They were literally told that. You have been warned. There may be difficulties caused through ignorance and prejudice, but don't let it get you down. Try and stand on your own feet as soon as you can. So the MP from Malden was absolutely right. The Times newspaper was very, very complimentary. Saw these folks coming merely to work. You know, we can talk about lots of other things, but we haven't got time. When those people from the Caribbean arrived, they saw a universe of possibilities. They imagined themselves working hard, going back home, fixing up their house, providing for their kids, sending their kids to good schools, you name it. 3 years turned to 5, 5 turned to 10, 10 turned to 20, 20 turned to a new wife, new family. And we know that it happened. In literature, in Black British literature, there is a genre which says that a lot of people who were left behind were traumatized because they couldn't understand why mum and dad left them. And they say, if you really loved me, why didn't you come back for me? Beverly told us they couldn't tell them the truth, that Britain wasn't just cold and unfriendly, but they were doing jobs beneath their station. So the universe of possibilities changed. I would be failing this evening, especially to young people, if I just told you a lot of bad news stories. But I think there's something serious for all of us as to what we do about the future. And we can't not talk about this man if we're talking about ships. Because 200 years before the Empire of Windrush, this man from Africa, Equiano, took a similar journey. And unlike the brothers on the Windrush, many of his friends jumped overboard as a symbol of resistance, that they'd rather die than to suffer slavery. This evening isn't for that, but again, if you've got about $7.99, paperback, W.H. Smith's, treat someone, especially a young person, to the life and times of Equiano. I don't need to tell you who that man is. I know he's a Londoner. I know he's a countryman from Guyana. But he did a number of good things because of his parents and what they did. In other words, unless we build upon the legacy of that generation, Mr. Macpherson was right. There are lots of opportunities, and I know what it's like. You know, my father, bless him, a stern man, a good man, a man who never hugged me and told me how much he loved me. But I know that he does. I know he's proud of me. Maybe his father never hugged him or told him how much he loved him. And many of our men are like that. We need to understand that. But if you're a man in the house and you've got kids, hug them and tell them that you love them. If you've got sons and grandsons, cry with them and tell them how awful things were, and you don't want them to make the same mistakes. Because, you know, together we are stronger by sharing the faults. And, you know, some of you folks know what it's like about this double life that some of us live, you know. We don't tell the kids about the truth, about our tragedies and our stories, because we think they'll look at us differently. Actually, they'll love us more. It's important for young men to know that their fathers messed up with young women when they were youngsters. It's important for them to tell them that. It's important for men who left the Caribbean and told their girlfriends that they were going to come back for them in 5 years' time and deserted them, to tell their kids what happened and why it happened. That's how psychological healing comes. There must be many mothers in the house who were qualified enough to be SRN nurses, and they were told they could only be auxiliaries and SCNs. I know that. My mother told me those stories. Many of you recognize that. We could put up other pictures, but everyone knows Trevor, I think. And everyone knows our sister with her afro next to Trevor. And she's a wonderful woman, right? I haven't got time to go through that. But I want you to imagine, if it's just one thing on this slide, for 2020, 2012, the future, how would you like to see the next generation, bearing in mind where we've actually come from? I'd want to see our kids doing a lot better in schools. Of course I do. My wife told me I couldn't leave this stage with saying something about gun and knife crime. She's right. But I want you to know that gun and knife crime isn't something that our youngsters major in. It is a minority of minority concerns. And yet still the media would have us to believe that knife and gun crime is rampant among us. Trust me, it isn't, Most of our kids are doing very well at school, thank you very much. If they are in church, they're going to universities, they're getting good jobs, and they are living good lives. They are, and God, I'm a product of church. Most of my friends have been in church, and these are good people. So I don't want us to believe this lie that Black Britain is in crisis because it is convenient for some people to actually fuel that fire, okay? There are some minority of our kids who we need to help, right? But we also need to concentrate in making sure those who are doing well do even better. And I make no apologies for saying that. So, my father came here because he wanted his 11 kids to get a good education. 6 born in the Caribbean, 5 over here. My father told me that he left the Caribbean because he wanted all of his 6 kids in the Caribbean to get a better education. My father also told me that I had to be twice as good, 3 times as good as the next person to get on. I know that. You probably tell your own kids that. That's the reality of our situation. But I want to see our kids, especially our kids in church, making use of all the opportunities, as Mr. Macpherson says. And yes, I want my 14-year-old daughter to be good enough to go to Oxford or Cambridge. Why shouldn't she? What's the big deal? I want to see more of our kids who live in Birmingham going to Birmingham University. Why shouldn't they? I want to see at least 25% of our youngsters becoming graduates. That's how we're going to transform Britain. But most importantly, listen, Britain is not the center of the universe. Once our kids have their education, they can go somewhere else. And there's no point going back to the Caribbean without skills. They came here so that you would have skills to take back if you want to actually go. And I want to end with a few personal notes. My first granddaughter, my first daughter. Hope in their eyes. I don't want my kids to ever be naive about our struggles in Britain. I don't want my kids to be naive about slavery. I don't want my kids not to know or to think that they're not African, because we are. That's you can't have the root without the fruit. It just so happened that we ended up in the Caribbean, right? I want my kids to know that when I was at school, it was a form of insult to call someone an African. I want my kids to know, actually, that's who we are. And there is an African proverb that said, it's not what you call me, but it's what I answer to. And I want my kids to answer to the very, very best that's in them. What do I want for my granddaughter? The same thing my grandmother wanted for me, the same thing my mother wanted for me. They wanted us to appreciate that we now live in better times. My great-great-great-grandmother came from the Congo, I was told. A strong, a dark, beautiful woman who gave our family a real sense of belonging. My kids have now got new challenges in a new generation. They're shiny with their 3 friends since they were 5 years of age. I want my kids to be able to compete with other kids. And that means my kids have got to be like your kids, disciplined. They've got to turn up in school on time. They've got to study. They've got to study hard. And they've got to understand that what they do really matters. And they've got to also know that God or the religious life matters. And they need to be able to find that for themselves. So I want to leave you with only one thought. And that thought is, what would have happened to Britain if in 1948, those young pioneers, the second Mayflower, didn't come to Britain? I know, for me, I wouldn't be standing here in front of you. And I thank my mum and dad, I thank my grandparents, and dare I say, thank the people of Britain for helping all of us to be what we are today. But most of all, I want to give thanks and praise to God for his grace and for his goodness. Amen.
I'm sure you join me in thanking Dr. Muir for a really thought-provoking address. Really thought-provoking, but delivered in such an eloquent and colourful way. I could sit there and listen to him for ages. I'm sure you feel exactly the same. One of the things... Yes, let's give him a hand again. Fantastic. I think he also needs to add to the list of things that you're so competent at. You need to add stand-up comedy. Definitely. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you. One of the things that he actually said was, looking back to go forward. And, we do need to look back because I can't remember who the quote was from, Marcus Garvey. He said, a people without a knowledge of their history are like trees without roots. So we do need to look back, but we don't need to be stuck in the past. We need to use it positively to propel us to live in the present, that's very important, but also to plan for the future.
You've been listening to a Fresh Paths podcast from Newlife Erdington. We hope that you not only enjoyed the message, but that you will be able to apply some of what you've heard to your own life. For more information about our church or to contact us for prayer, go to www.newlife.org.uk.